The gospel reading this morning comes from the gospel according to Matthew, reading from the 18th chapter. I'll read verses 15 through 20. Listen for the word of the Lord. If your brother or sister sins, go and point out their fault just between the two of you. If they listen to you, you've won them over. But if they will not listen, take one or two others along, so that every matter may be established by the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. If they still refuse to listen, tell it to them. Truly, I tell you, whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. Again, truly I tell you that if 2 of you on earth agree about anything they ask for, it will be done for them by my Father in heaven. Be seated. Pam pointed out to me just this morning that the reading from Romans picks right up where we had Sunday school this morning. I mean, it's like it was planned that way. It was, but it wasn't my fault. And I wasn't bright enough to figure it out on my own, so God told Pam, why don't you tell your husband that this is what's going on? So let's take a look at it again. In Romans, in my Bible here that has a heading that says, Love fulfills the law. Let no debt remain outstanding except the continuing debt to love one another. For whoever loves others has fulfilled the law. The commandments, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not murder, you shall not steal, you shall not covet, and whatever other command there may be, are summed up in this one command. Love your neighbor as yourself. Love does no harm to a neighbor. Therefore, love is the fulfillment of the law. That sounds somewhat familiar to those who were in Sunday school this morning. I mentioned this morning, and I think I mentioned it last week also, that this book is all about love. I've mentioned before that it is about the relationship of God with humankind and the relationship of humankind to God, and also humankind to each other. And that relationship is bound up in love. And I told them in Sunday school this morning that if anybody who stands there behind that pulpit, or in my case stands out here, anybody who comes into this church, or for that matter anywhere, who professes to be preaching the gospel of Jesus Christ and is not preaching love, they're not preaching the word. We've heard of pastors who have gotten up and preached hate. They preached about how God hates this person or this type of persons. God doesn't have a message of hate in his Bible. It's not there. God dislikes a lot of the things we do. He dislikes what a lot of us are. But he loves all of us. And the kicker is, he expects us to do the same. And if that's the only thing that we do, that we love one another, that we love our neighbors, and somehow God sometimes wants to test us and put some really unlovable people in our neighborhoods. But if we love each other, and especially our neighbors, then we have fulfilled all the other commandments. Because if in fact you love somebody, or you love as God loves, everything else falls into line. You won't do all the other things if indeed you love God and you love your neighbor. And it seems to be such an easy message. But it's very obvious that it's very difficult to do. Because we see hate all across the world. Our country is fighting a war. I guess we don't get to call it a war anymore, but our soldiers are fighting in the Middle East because of hate. Can you imagine what it would be like in these countries if everyone loved one another, regardless of their religious views? They say these are wars of religion. They're not wars of religion, they're wars of hate. These are satanic wars. Satan putting one against another and using God as the excuse. We see hate running rampant on our own city streets. We see violence. Do you think that if everybody in this country loved, as this book tells us to love, as God has loved us, as Jesus demonstrated that love while he was on the earth, do you think if all of us loved in that way, we would have any of these problems in our country? I'm going to step out on a limb and say we wouldn't. And it wouldn't matter who is in the White House, and it wouldn't matter who is, in charge of the Congress. It wouldn't matter who the mayor is. It wouldn't matter who the sheriff is. It wouldn't even matter who the policemen on the streets are. If everyone loved as this book says to love, we wouldn't have any of these problems. Everything else falls into line. We try to teach our children not to steal. We try to teach them not to commit murder. We try to teach them they can't go running around on their spouse. We try to teach them that they can't envy other people. I'm not really sure that we've really tried to teach them all that much on who and how to love. It's, the church's responsibility. But in fact, it's something that has to be taught all the time. I saw a really interesting picture the other day, and it was a baby, just a few days old. And it was laying there on a little blanket, and it was sound asleep. You know how cute babies look when they're asleep. and not screaming. And underneath it said, this baby doesn't have any prejudices. It has no understanding about how we live, who we like, who we don't like. It all has to be taught. And our job is to teach them. And we can talk about it all we want, but the truth is we have to live it, because that's what the kids see. Saw another cartoon the other day. It was Dennis the Menace. I liked Dennis. Dennis the Menace. And he's there with a little friend, little black friend, and he's holding the kid's hand, and they're both dirty because Dennis was always dirty. And he's introducing them to his mother. And he says, Mom, this is whoever it was. He's 4 years old, and he's just like me, except he's left-handed. If we could just be that way. Instead of he's just like me except he's black, or he's just like me because he's Muslim, or he's just like me except he lives in the city, or he's just like me except. But we're far behind the 8 ball on this one. Society has slipped up somewhere. I fear it's my generation. Maybe it started with my parents, but I'm not convinced of that. I'm starting to think it's more my generation and my grandchildren, that age that doesn't seem to get it. So somehow we need to teach our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren, as we have communication with them, as they spend time with us, so they can understand what it truly means to love one another. To teach the Bible, usually with our actions, because sometimes our words get a little confused.